Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Michelle Baumann.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
This week on Heroic Media, a Catholic seminarian diagnosed with terminal brain cancer says suicide is not the answer.
An actress on the hit show Walking Dead goes undercover and saves the lives of 55 victims of sex trafficking.
And the president of Students for Life says that she believes abortion will be abolished in her lifetime.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we explore news headlines that deal with very foundational moral issues, a lot of issues that, stories and topics that relate to family, marriage, and life.
Exactly, and those stories often tend to involve abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly.
So Patrick, what's our first story for the day?
Okay, in our first story, a Raleigh seminarian with terminal brain cancer responds to Brittany Maynard. And if you remember, she is the 29-year-old woman who publicly shared her plan to commit suicide after she learned that she herself had terminal brain cancer. So I really liked that he shared his thoughts, because I think what we need so much in society is to hear a differing opinion and one that's pro-life, because pro-life is much more than just abortion, although it's commonly kind of just put in that corner. But it's pro-life from before birth till death. You know, the very young to the very old, and in between, like in this case, right? This 29-year-old woman who is contemplating. Hopefully she doesn't go through with it, but these types of things happen all the time, right? Where people in certain states, I think there's 5 states that have legalized physician-assisted suicide. And so here we get the kind of flip side of the coin of somebody who has terminal brain cancer but says, no, don't end your life. So what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that exactly what you said is so good that he's speaking up, because what we need is his witness. Right. And he mentioned in this blog post that he is very shy, and that a lot of times he doesn't even like to tell people that he is suffering from this type of cancer. So to open up, I think, was really a heroic and a very courageous act on his part.
Definitely.
And we look a little bit at his story. He was diagnosed with brain cancer at the age of 24.
Yeah.
It was because of where it was in the brain. They couldn't operate on it. And the average survival time for that type of cancer is about 18 months.
Right.
And that was 6 years ago. So he's outlived the initial prognosis. And he said, he was a naval officer at the time, and in his mid-20s, and he had all of his hopes and dreams ahead of him.
Exactly.
So I think first of all, we have to acknowledge the incredible suffering, both for him and for Brittany. And just, he talks about the constant turmoil, the seizures, the headaches. He said there are times when he wanted to die. You can just see the desperation. So we have to acknowledge the very real suffering here.
Yes.
He says that he knows what's going to eventually happen. He'll lose control of his body and mind. It will be very painful. And yet he's choosing a different path, and he's saying, I want to embrace life as much as I can. He entered the seminary after his diagnosis.
Yes.
And so he's saying, I want to spend the rest of my life, however much time I have, serving others through the priesthood.
And he really felt that God was calling him to the priesthood. And I'm glad you pointed out the age that he was diagnosed, and that he survived much longer than the prognosis that was originally given. And in this case, especially with Brittany Maynard, they said, oh, you have 6 months to live. And he really, I liked his viewpoint, because a lot of the points that Brittany made about how she felt, and like, oh my gosh, 6 months, that feels like your life is going to end tomorrow, right? When you're expecting to live, into far into, maybe your 80s or 90s or however old. And so I really liked how he could relate to her on certain things, but I also like how he diverted from some of the things that she said, and also some of the things that other people said. Like, one of the things that I thought was, I'm glad he brought up, and I don't think we really brought it up the last time we talked about this story, but that the whole idea that this is a brave decision that she's making, and he states that this is the opposite, right, of what it means to be brave, and just to give up. And you know, he says no diagnosis warrants suicide, right? How can we, with the kind of the way culture views death and how this is kind of like a merciful type thing, how do you think that we can explain it, especially, you know, after hearing what the seminarian had to say about it?
I think that's a good question. I think it's really difficult to try to explain suffering to a culture that believes we have to escape suffering at all costs. And I think that understanding of suffering is what's really key here. And just the idea that you know, we don't have to go out and seek out suffering, but we realize that there is suffering in life and that it's not meaningless. That's so key, because the culture see, like, what's the point of suffering? But if you really believe in Christ and you believe in heaven and you believe that there is life after death and you believe in the resurrection, then our suffering takes on meaning, because we can unite it to the cross of Christ and offer it up for the salvation of souls. And so all of a sudden it's not meaningless. It has purpose and it has value. It's still difficult, but there's something more to it.
Absolutely, and I think you really nailed it right there. That's what the key is, right? Because Christ gave meaning to suffering, and we can unite that suffering. And you know, he talks about that, the idea of redemptive suffering, right? Where when you're going through suffering, it's almost like a gift from God that He is allowing you to use this tool of grace. You know, you can offer that suffering up for other people, for yourself, for people in purgatory. You can unite that suffering to Christ. And he has said that, you know, in his experiences with dealing with people, it's helped him empathize and sympathize with other people who are going through suffering, and help him to understand where they were coming from, you know, now that he's going through it, and kind of see the beauty and the joy that you can have by taking care of somebody, especially at the end of their life, right? Because that's what Brittany would be missing if she does choose to you know, and people like Brittany in these situations, if they do choose to end their own life, they don't have that opportunity to have that special part of their life at the end of their life. You know, you're more than just your personality and your smile that may fade after you start to suffer the consequences of cancer, right? And so you know, that's what he talks about, is just that you know, that your whole life is important, right? You're not just one little piece of your life. And so you need to live that out to the fullest. And you know, of course, as Christians, like you already said, we can unite that suffering, so it's not meaningless.
That's key.
All right, on our next story. A Walking Dead actress, Lori Holden, went undercover recently and saved 55 sex slaves in real life this time, not on a TV show or anything like that. And she worked with Operation Underground Railroad. And so we've talked about Operation Underground Railroad before. And so they're really cool. It's a really cool organization, kind of unique idea. The head of the organization is an ex-CIA agent. And so you know, I can only imagine, you know, the kind of guy that he is. But what they did was they went down to Colombia, and they went down there to bust a whole bunch of sex traffickers. And so apparently they set up this huge elaborate party, and they got these sex traffickers to come, and when they tried to sell these underage children to them, basically they had video cameras hidden too, so they're kind of like filming the whole operation. And she was a part of it. She was out there watching. Lori was watching the children, and then once they made a FA transaction, all the police and everything jumped out. And so that's what this Operation Underground Railroad does. They go around to different countries and work with the authorities there in order to bring this to an end.
Exactly. Yeah, and I thought, you know, my response to this was, wow, how great to see an actress using her fame and using her you know, public figure to stand for something positive, because how often do we just see horrible role models or standing, you know, trying to push for abortion and contraception? So good for her. So for trying to do something, you know, great like this. And you know, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime said in its 2012 report that there are about 2 million victims of sex trafficking each year. And I think it's so important that we realize this happens all over the world. It happens in our own country. It happens, every major city in the US has a problem with sex trafficking. And you know, I was actually just last week, I was sitting at a restaurant, and there were two women at the table next to me, and I sort of overheard part of their conversation. And one of them was describing sex trafficking to the other one and saying, yeah, they bring in girls and they're basically forced into sex slavery. And the other woman said, oh my gosh, I had no idea this happens at all. Whether in the US or elsewhere, she had no idea that even existed. And so I think I was like, wow, you know, I'm aware of this because I read a lot about it, and you know, I keep up with the news, and I'm aware of, you know, the Pope's comments on it. But for a lot of people, there's no awareness of this.
I agree.
So it's never going to change unless people are aware that it's happening. So I think that's a key part of this. And maybe having, you know, an actress, having someone famous involved in this is what it's going to take to open people's eyes to this.
Absolutely, and I think those are great points. You know, her using her fame to kind of help spread awareness on this. I know, I remember from the last time we covered this story, Operation Underground Railroad has some pretty cool like merchandise and stuff that you can buy that will kind of help spread awareness of sex trafficking. But you're right, I think a lot of people don't know that this is going on, or you think, oh, it doesn't happen here in the U.S.
Right.
I mean, we did a story about Tenancingo, Mexico, right, which is like pretty much where the vast majority of the sex trafficking in the U.S. comes from. And it's just horrific to hear the stories and the people that are involved in these, and they're just trapped. You know, a lot of times in the U.S., I think we have this idea that, oh, they're voluntarily doing this because they're making money, and that's their choice, that's what they want to do. But the vast majority of the time, they're not making any money, they're not wanting to be a part of this. And the sad part is that they don't really, a lot of times they can't escape.
Right.
Because police officers in some of these locations are involved in it. You know, it's like if you can't go to the authorities, who do you go to? You know, or they feel like when they've been taken to the United States, they can't get out of it because if they get out, then their captors warn them like, oh, you're going to be here illegally, and then they're going to do all this stuff to you.
Right.
You know, so it's just a really dire situation.
Absolutely, definitely something that's good to shine a spotlight on. So I'm glad that's what's happening.
Yep.
Coming up after the break, we'll talk with the president of Students for Life about their work on college campuses.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. In our next story, an unplanned pregnancy in college can be difficult and terrifying. Some studies suggest that up to 45% of abortions are performed on women ages 18 to 24. Working to make a difference is a group called Students for Life. So I actually had the opportunity to speak with Kristen Hawkins, the president of Students for Life, and she was able to share a little bit more about the organization. Let's take a look. Kristen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been involved with Students for Life for years. You've been the president since 2008?
2006.
2006, okay. So tell me about what Students for Life is doing to help promote the pro-life movement on college campuses.
Sure. Well, when we got started in 2006, the idea was to take a political campaign style approach to going onto college campuses. Instead of waiting for a pro-life student who needs help to email an office of people they don't know, we actually go out into the college campuses. We'll stand there with our clipboards or iPads, ask people if they're pro-life. We'll go into the Newman centers and start asking people, hey, are you pro-life? Do you want to join our group? This is why a pro-life group matters.
And when you're doing that, what kind of responses have you gotten?
Well, you know, it's actually surprising. A lot of people think that the college campus is completely hostile to the life message. And there are campuses where we do face difficulty. We've got to call in the lawyers, or we have issues with the administration, or a campus will host Sex Week or something like that. But the students themselves are very receptive to the message. We're always posing this issue, the abortion issue, as a human rights issue. And so when you're able to explain it to students, tell them what abortion is, you'll be surprised that a lot of the students are actually against abortion.
That's interesting. That does sort of surprise me because there does seem to be this narrative out there that young people, they like abortion and you're not going to convince them otherwise. So that's very interesting.
And that's not the truth with our generation. I mean, polls are showing that this is a pro-life generation. Now, would they vote to make abortion illegal? No. But do they not like abortion? Yes. And so that's actually where we focus a lot of our time, saying, well, if abortion's so bad, you don't like it, then why do you think it still should be illegal?
Interesting. And so you're working sort of on this intellectual, like helping to form people's minds.
Yes.
And then Students for Life also works to help to reach out concretely to women in need on college campuses who are facing unplanned pregnancies.
Sure. I mean, the pro-life movement is vast. There's a lot of different ways that any pro-lifer can get involved. They can get involved in service, so helping pregnant and parenting students in crisis who need extra support. Some of our groups get involved politically in their community. A lot of our groups do activism, so they go to their state capitals, or they'll go rally or pray in front of the abortion facility. We encourage our groups to kind of do a little bit of everything, just to make sure you're showing your campus that the pro-life movement is vast and there's a lot of things that you can do. And it really helps, especially when you're involved with the service of helping women, to really show people you're putting your money where your mouth is, and that you're not just talking about these hypothetical situations and telling women what they have to do in crisis. You're actually right there at the moment of crisis helping out.
And I think that's so important. When I think of Pope Francis, he likes to use the phrases to encounter and to accompany. That's what he keeps calling us to do. And I see Students for Life as really doing that, being there to accompany those women in the difficult moment and say, you know what, we're not just going to stand here and say, no, don't have an abortion. We're going to say, let me show you the other way. Let me give you those resources. Let me help you set that up.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about Planned Parenthood is not empowering to her. They tell her no. They say, no, you can't have this child and continue education. No, you can't have this baby and have the career you always wanted. It's the pro-life movement that they're the ones saying yes. So on college campuses, sadly, a lot of times we're doing more than the college administration is to help the pregnant and parenting women, simply because we care and we want to talk about these issues.
What are some of the needs that pregnant women in high school or college are going to be facing that you can sort of help with?
Well, a lot of it's just support. When we wrote our first book a couple of years ago, we interviewed a lot of women who face a crisis pregnancy, some who had chosen life and some who had chosen abortion. And what was interesting was that every woman we interviewed, she made her decision based on the opinion of one person, that she always went to people asking them, what should I do? And the girls that ended up choosing abortion never could find one person to tell them no, and they were searching for it. And the girls that didn't choose abortion, who chose life, eventually found that person. One girl actually called, I think, 5 or 6 of her friends until she finally found someone to say, you don't have to do this. So a lot of times the Students for Life groups, we tell them, you don't need a lot of money, you don't have to have a ton of expertise. You just simply have to be there saying, you can do this. Let us help you. We'll drive you to the Pregnancy Resource Center. We may not have all the answers, but we'll find out those answers with you.
That's incredible. I didn't realize that. That's I think that's very telling, and that's good for the pro-life movement to be aware of. And then, I've talked to people from Students for Life saying, yeah, we actually organized baby showers to, or helped them figure
Diaper
out flexible schedules, and just really being there and providing that support in the moment when they're making a decision, but then throughout those 9 months and after the baby is born, just having that support all, throughout the entire journey.
Sure. I mean, we've had babies who have been saved on campuses because of a simple $500 scholarship.
Wow.
I mean, if you look at that, $500 is not a lot. I've got 3 children and I've got my 4th on my way. Formula, diapers, all that stuff adds up. $500 does not mean a lot. But it was because somebody on campus cared and they had a scholarship for pregnant parenting students that these lives are being saved.
That's incredible. So what kind of growth has Students for Life seen? How many campuses are you reaching out to?
Sure. When we started in 2006, we thought there were about 180 pro-life groups on college campuses. We didn't know how active they were, and sadly a lot of them weren't very active. Today we're at 838 on high school, college, med, and law school campuses, and all of those are active groups. We measure the activity level of every single one of the groups we work with. So there's been a lot of growth in the past 8 years.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible.
Well, it speaks to, when you have a calling and God's placed something in your heart and you're doing what He's called you to do, the blessings that you'll receive.
Absolutely. Would you say that you're hopeful about the future of the pro-life movement?
Oh, I'm extremely hopeful. I actually believe we will abolish abortion in this lifetime. And I think this generation, building off all the incredible work from the pro-life leaders and for decades past, we've got the best chance at actually ending this thing. It's not going to be easy, and there's a lot more we have to do. But if you look at the polls, you look at, kind of where the tide is going, it's going in our direction.
Why do you think that young people are pro-life? Why do you think that they see, is it that the ultrasounds, the technology, they see this as an injustice? What is it?
Well, I think that's part of it. We view abortion differently than our parents. We've seen our brothers and sisters in the ultrasound. So the debates change. It's no longer a blob of tissue. You can't say that, because if a student tries to say it to me, I'll say, go to Google on your phone and type in baby. You can find it on yourself. I don't even have to argue with that. I think a lot of them have a personal experience with abortion. So they all know someone, a friend who sat and cried about abortion. A lot of them have seen the bloody images. They've Googled it on their own. They've gotten curious and they've seen the result of abortion. So they do view it differently because we've had over 40 years of children being killed. And they do see it as a human rights issue. That's also very, very important. When we're talking on campuses, we don't present the issue as a religious issue. We present it in a secular way. I mean, it's great. We talk about abortion and we talk about how contraception is bad for women in a completely secular way. And it works.
Wow. So what are the responses of women when you're telling them about contraception?
Sure. Well, you know, it's actually the men who get the most angry because they say, we've never been told how abortion and contraception can hurt our girlfriends.
Wow.
And so we did a display this spring, and it was remarkable. It was the men who were the most shocked and upset that none of this information had been told to them.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, thank you for all of the work that you're doing. I've admired Students for Life for years, and I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing to support
Thanks for having us on.
Wow, that was some interesting discussion there. I really liked that. She had a lot of good stuff to talk about. I really liked what she had to say about, it was interesting rather, that most students oppose but don't want to outlaw abortion.
Right.
That's really interesting. It's strange that we live in a society where people think, oh yeah, this is wrong, you shouldn't do it, but then they don't want to make it illegal. And it's almost like this, it's a product of multiple things, but it really, I think it ties down to relativism, you know?
Absolutely.
But I think people don't think about it quite enough, you know? When you look at the truth of it, that you're killing a human being, you know, it's not just wrong for you, it's wrong, period, right?
Yeah.
And what else did you like about what she had to say?
I loved her optimism in saying that she really does believe that abortion is going to be, we're going to see the abolition of it in our lifetime, which I thought was really wonderful. And I also just love the expansion, the growth in the last few years that Students for Life has seen. I think that really speaks to the need for this group and to the longing that young people have, that there's a need for this, but people want the truth. People don't want to be forced into abortion.
Absolutely.
How she said that when women are given that one voice telling them you don't have to do this, that they choose not to.
Yeah, and I thought it was real interesting too that she said that men, how they responded to contraception, like learning the facts, like, oh my gosh, you know, I was doing these harmful, you know, all these bad things could be going on with my wife because of contraception. So I thought that was really really interesting too, because men do need to step up in society. So
absolutely. Coming up after the break, one feminist group says that surrogacy is anti-woman.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman. In our final story, surrogate pregnancy is a heated topic in many countries around the world. One feminist group in Sweden is speaking out against the practice, saying that it is anti-woman.
This is really shocking to me.
It was very interesting.
Yeah, because it seems like there's a lot of different types of feminist groups around there, right? And when we're talking about this particular feminist group and others, we're not talking about authentic feminism, right? We're talking about kind of radical feminism of today, right? And so, yeah, it was very interesting that they were against surrogacy. And some of the things that they had to say were very interesting as to why they opposed it. Some of the things they even said were almost seemed Catholic to me. So it was interesting. And then also they, of course, during some of the things they were saying, they mentioned that they supported abortion. So clearly there's still, you know, differences in thought there between Christians and these particular this feminist group. But it was good to see a feminist group saying that this is wrong.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And some of the points that they made about it, you know, their big focus was that we're not looking at this through a human rights lens, and we really need to, because the woman, it's poor women from poor countries that are bearing these children, and the parents who are purchasing, essentially, they're renting their womb to implant their own child are from wealthier Western countries, often in India. And they found that a lot of these, in one study of surrogate mothers in one part of India, found that 50% of them were illiterate. So a lot of them couldn't even understand the contract they were signing.
Exactly.
So, and you know, there's the bigger question of, can you really sign away the right to your body?
Right.
Is that kind of contract even valid? You know, we don't allow people to sign themselves into slavery.
Yeah, and then what if they change their mind, right? Like, what if they decide, oh shoot, this is something that I don't want to do?
Right.
You know, can as like a law enforcement, like a police officer or something, can you go say, no, you're going to have this,
right? Absolutely.
So it infringes upon all these human rights, and it's just really like when you start thinking about all the consequences, it's really interesting.
Absolutely, and I love that this is coming from a feminist group that's really working for gender equality. That's one of their stated goals. And they said having a feminist approach to surrogacy means rejecting the idea that women can be used as mere vessels and that their reproductive capabilities can be bought. So I think that's absolutely key.
Exactly, and they went on to say that the right to bodily integrity is a right which should not be able to be negotiated by any form of contract. And I agree. I think that's kind of what we already talked about. I think that's so critical, right? These human rights, they can't just. We've talked about it before, like the rent-a-womb, and it's almost it's just this really strange. And I know there's some interesting circumstances too, like a lot of these poor countries. And in other countries, a lot of Westerners basically will seek this out because they have the financial means to do this. And one of the issues that comes up with this is this altruistic approach, right? Where basically you don't pay for services, right? And it's just really strange to me. It's very foreign to me that people would do this, and it's very hard to monitor this, right? Because in Sweden, they're debating whether or not they're going to legalize this altruistic approach, right? And so. They're basically, I think they're trying to break a middle ground. They're saying, okay, we don't really think you should, but we'll go middle ground and say, okay, no money's involved to kind of make it better, right? But it's really strange, and there's a whole host of problems that this can bring up.
I mean, one of them being, why are women doing this if they're not getting paid? And sometimes it looks like they actually are being promised payment, and then they don't follow through with it because there's no contract. They just, so women really, they're being taken advantage of here. It is a human rights issue, and I think it's great that this is a feminist lens approaching this, because people who do care about women's well-being should care about surrogacy and should be speaking out against it.
Absolutely, and from like a governmental perspective, how do you regulate and monitor this, right? Especially from the altruistic perspective. Like how can you guarantee that there wasn't money under the table, or that people weren't being coerced and things like this, right?
Yeah, and then we've seen instances where then there is a problem with the baby, where there's a disease, or they find out that they're going to have some kind of disability, and the parents say, okay, we want you to have an abortion.
Yes.
And the surrogate mother is saying, no, I'm not going to abort this child. I'm not going to kill this child. So, I mean, we had a case like this recently. So it's messy, it's difficult to regulate, and in the end, women are being used, and we should set higher standards than that, and we should not allow women's bodies to be rented or sold or anything else.
And women and children, right? Just turned into kind of a commodity, like something to be purchased or something to be used and then discarded, right? And what happens, I always wonder about these emotional bonds, because having children of my own, my wife has strong emotional attachments, There's a lot of things to consider.
That's a really good point as well.
All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
That's it for this week. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.